Welcome to Conversate, our podcast where we engage in conversation. On this week's episode, I, Aaron Gerke, and Kevin Bender are engaging in a conversation about stories, about our stories, about how often we make our stories all about us. But we also have a conversation ultimately about God's story, about how our stories are part of a larger story. And how, as we get to know this larger story that we've been written into by God, that actually makes our stories make a little bit more sense. So, if that introduction doesn't make too much sense, well, I think the conversation will. So, thank you for tuning in once again. We really hope you enjoy it. Well, Kevin.
Hey, Aaron.
Good morning. Welcome back to my couch.
Oh, yeah, man. It's good to be here. For all you listeners listening auditorily, we're on a couch. Yeah, with your ears.
Auditorily. Is that how you say it?
I think so.
Auditorially? No, that's probably not right.
Yeah,
I think you said it right.
Yeah, if it's a word. I'm just trying to make up more words. It's been a while.
With your ears. Yes, this brown couch does good for making up words, doesn't it?
That's right. Old Faithful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, those of you watching us, you can see that we're back, and maybe the audio sounds a little bit better too. So we, for quite a while, some due to just my own laziness, but we had some broken sound equipment that we needed to get sent back in and either repaired or replaced.
Or restored.
They did not restore this. They just sent me new stuff.
Oh, okay.
Actually, they sent me, I sent it into them, and then they were like, yeah, we'll send you another one. And then they sent me something totally different. And it's sitting on my desk. And I contacted them, and I was like, I don't know why I got this in the mail. And they said, yeah, I don't know why you got that either. We'll send you the right thing. I was like, do you want me to send this back? And they're like, no, you can just keep it. I'm like, okay. So I don't know. Is that like good? I suppose that's good customer service. They just, I don't know. They just send you new stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, that is. Yes, you're right. That part is totally good customer service.
But we have been restored.
That's right,
to
man.
our proper way of doing our podcast.
The product was broken, and they came in and
just restored it.
Fixed it, dude.
Oh man, it's interesting. I mean, what are we at? We're at like week 7 or something of this whole idea of this rubble restoration. Are we at 7, 6?
Yeah, sounds right. Yeah.
It's been fascinating how much this theme or this idea is resonating with people. You know, this idea of rubble and restoration. Mm-hmm. I mean, I got a note given to me by somebody coming to church, just saying, I'm feeling like I'm being restored through the life and ministry of this church. I mean, other people have just dropped those words to me at other times, just like you just did. Like we're being restored. So I think it really is resonating, and it is with me too. This whole idea of restoration and out of the rubble.
Yeah, I feel like if anything, my ears are a little more like attuned to that kind of language and that idea. Since we've been going through it as well, I don't know that I would have, made that comment about sending in this equipment had we not been going through this sermon series. And I think for me too, one of the things that really brought it to life was actually when I went out to some of the ruins. And there's a handful of ruins around here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But to record one of those communion videos for a Sunday service, and it's a really it's a pretty striking image, a picture. Ruins.
Yeah.
And standing in them, and then realizing like, oh man, like that's me, that's one part of me.
Yeah.
But then we have the piece of Jesus coming down, and that restoration piece, and I guess anytime you've restored anything, anytime you've lived with the frustration of something broken, like our equipment, and then you get to experience the restoration of whatever it was that's broken, whether it's your house or your tech stuff, whatever, or your heart, your soul, or a relationship.
Right.
Like there's something really, really beautiful about that.
Totally. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and you were preaching this last week on the whole idea of understanding like what where we're at in the story, and whose story are we part of? Are we just our own story as we live our lives, or are we part of a bigger story? And we're actually be using that language a lot coming up in a couple of weeks as we as a church are going to be opening up a book called The Story, which is most of the Bible put into chronological order, and so we're going to be journeying through that for 31 weeks. But the whole point of that is to get to know the great story of the Scriptures from beginning to end, all culminating in Jesus, from creation to new creation, and seeing our lives as part of that story, written into God's story. And so you were kind of teasing that idea already because of what Nehemiah and these returned exiles are going through. Do you want to just kind of recap that a little bit, or maybe put it in some different words? Like how did you get to that place by what we were reading in Nehemiah?
Yeah, so in Nehemiah, really chapters 8 and 9, you get this pretty exciting, heightened kind of worship setting. So the people are back. They're in Jerusalem. They've been there for a long time now, but now like kind of all those big projects are finished. The temple's finished, which is Zerubbabel, kind of where we started our journey. The people have been kind of spiritually rebuilt somewhat with Ezra's work, and now Nehemiah has finished the walls. So like everything is done. It's kind of a high point in the story, and they want to worship. They want to say, hey, like, thanks, God. You saw these things through. It wasn't easy. There were lots of hiccups along the way, but like we're here, and this is good, and we're back. And as a part of their worship, I want to say it's a 7-day marathon of worship that they have, actually. Yeah. And in it, they're basically going through the story of their people, and that's what chapter 9 is. So chapter 9 gives us, I think, a glimpse into what their worship looked like, at least in part. Chapter 9 isn't the whole of what went on those 7 days, but chapter 9 is basically a sermon, and in it, they trace back, story after story after story, from God's act of creation to calling Abram, to leading their people, them getting into Egypt, leading them out of Egypt, just kind of this history of God's saving activity in the lives of his people. But what really struck me was that it says when the people heard the words of the law, the words of the Torah, like that's the story, they wept. And it's like, that's a strange, that's kind of a strange response,
Yeah.
So anyways, basically the reason I got into story language was in part because I knew we were going to be doing the story here, so we wanted to drip that out. But also there's a precedent for it because they're doing the story in these chapters.
Right.
And it really, I think it was the weeping of the people that made me think, just back on my own life, like we all do have our own stories.
Yeah.
We do, right? Like our lives are like stories. And I watched a lot of TV growing up, so
okay.
I don't know, I relate to TV shows, and there are times when just as I think of my own past, I see it in movie form, I feel like.
Wow.
Okay. Not that my life's all that glamorous, but that's just how I think of it sometimes. But so I can think of, episodes, you might say, of my past where, man, my story, when I was confronted with God's story, with the, kind of what he really wants from me, what he has called me to be, what actually he has called me even, thinking about those words, holy and blameless from Ephesians. Man, I think of some episodes in my life where I'm like, that I was not living that story.
And that's where when you hear, when you said being confronted with God, where you almost like the Israelites, where you weep, right? Where you're kind of confronted with, oh man, I didn't live up to this great story, this great life that God has given to me, all these opportunities, the way that he would desire for me to live as somebody holy and blameless in this world. I chose this.
Yeah.
Sure, that's going to bring you to a place of, hopefully, of repentance. But then it doesn't end there. Like, our God is not just a God who shows us our sin, leaves us to weep, and then says, yep, do better next time. No, but our God is what we're hearing is a restoring God.
That's right.
So he brings us up out of that rubble, and he restores us to be the people that he desires us to be. And that's where we go, wow, God, thank you. Mm-hmm. Like, I cannot restore myself. I create rubble, you restore. Like, I mean, that's it, right?
Exactly. And that's exactly what happens for the people in the story of Ezra and Nehemiah, right? They don't stay weeping. Yeah. It finishes, I think it's like 2 verses later, and they're being encouraged by Ezra and Nehemiah. They're basically being like, I forget the Hebrew word is basically to shush, So it was odd to read that section in chapter 8 too, because it says something like they told them to be quiet.
Okay.
I don't think they're trying to tell them like repress your feelings, like don't emote. That's not what they're saying. They're shushing. It's almost like a child, right? They're like it's okay. It's okay. Like, but like, so calm down. Be calm. Be still. Be quiet. Shush. And then they tell them, don't weep. This is a day of rejoicing. This is a day holy to the Lord. And it finishes this little section in chapter 8 saying, and the people went greatly rejoicing, for they had understood the law.
Yeah.
So they understood the story. And that's kind of our job, right? Help people understand this story of Scripture. Mm-hmm. That it's not, like you say, just a book of, this is how you're supposed to live,
Mm-hmm.
It's not, the Bible is not a how-to guide, for your life practically. That's not its main point. Its main point is, this is a story.
Yeah. Well, and I've heard it said, and this is a little bit of a pun, but when we look at the Bible, it is history, but it's his story, right? I mean, so you can make that if you like that sort of stuff, right? It's history. It's stuff that happened, but it's his story. So it's a story of who God is. The Scriptures demonstrate to us who God is, who we are, and what God does for his people and is promising to do. And so people throughout history, those who believe in God, have recounted these stories of God's faithfulness to an unfaithful people. And so we look at it and we go, wow, God, he really is, like, I mean, as the Old Testament describes him, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. He just, I mean, sometimes we read the Old Testament and we're like, man, why is God seems so mad at people all the time. You're like, yeah, but the people are being stupid.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Like, they're just selfish. They're wicked. They don't even last any amount of years being faithful to God. I mean, in the story of Ezra and Nehemiah, it's already gone like up and down, and this is like 100 years. But then you think about your own life, and any given day or any given week, you come to church on Sunday and you're like, oh, this is great, it's so nice to be around people and hear God's word, and then all of a sudden you're like, on Monday, you just wake up and you just start grinding and do stupid stuff, and a couple days later you're like, who am I?
Yeah.
I mean, we fall apart so quickly. I mean, the sin is just rampant. And so this is why we gather as Christians for worship. It is ultimately to be brought back together into this time of celebration, and have recalled for us the stories of God's faithfulness, so that we look back to go, wow, God was faithful to those people. God has been faithful to me. God, that must mean that God is still faithful to me today, because he's promised that he will be faithful to me always, right? Even into eternity. And so that's where, I mean, this is how our stories intersect with the story that God has written and is writing, and that we're part of. Right, and so as we read the Scriptures and encounter God's faithfulness to his people, we can realize that God is working in our lives in those same kinds of ways.
Totally, yeah, exactly. His work is not done. Right. It's the Bible. Well, I mean, it ends in Revelation, I guess, technically, right, as you're reading it.
But also that points us to a time that still hasn't happened yet.
Exactly. Like, we can't conceive of the Bible as something that's already taken place, that's separate from us or distinct from us. Like, the pages are still being written, in a sense, in terms of, like, he is still the sovereign king.
Yeah.
You know? That's easier to see when we look back at, like, Daniel, like we did, right?
Yeah.
And we see God working in even these pagan foreign leaders.
Right.
It's much harder when we look at our world today, and we look at Afghanistan, and it's easy to be, maybe despairing or cynical or wonder, like, is God present? Is God working in this?
But you would have imagined that the people then were asking the same question.
Exactly. Yep. And the pattern is look back at the story, chart God's faithfulness, and know that He will keep doing that.
Right.
I mean, that's why they're always repeating that phrase of
well, and honestly, that's like the whole the biblical idea of hope is often one. I mean, we always think of hope as just a future-oriented thing, but a biblically oriented hope is actually, it's both. It's looking back in order to understand that what is to come is actually true because of what you've experienced from God in the past and what He's promised to do in the future. You go, oh yeah, it's going to follow through. I mean, it's the same thing with like people in your own life. I mean, if you've got somebody in your life that's super reliable and they've always, I mean, none of us are perfectly reliable, but if you've got people in your life that have been reliable in the past, you just kind of end up counting on, if they say they're going to do something, you trust, oh yeah, they're going to do it. You have hope because they've proven to be reliable. I mean, I think God has proven to be reliable.
Exactly. Yes, we see the character of God and can trust that character. I've also heard it explained this way. This was just maybe like an image for faith, I think, but it was this idea of the father holding his child and launching them up in the air, right? And you look at the kid's face, and the kid's just loving it, right? I mean, they're having a ball. It's a blast. You look at, maybe the wife or the grandparents, and they're kind of a little horrified, like, a little too high there, Dad, But as the father doing that, like, you're going to catch your kid.
Yeah.
You are not going to let them fall.
Yeah.
No way, you got them.
Yeah.
You're reliable.
Yeah.
Now, like, I'm sure when I was a kid, I probably loved that, getting chucked in the air. It's a little harder to think, like, as an adult, if there was a man, twice the size of me who picked me up and chucked me in the air, I would be horrified, by that.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I used to do that I've always done that to my kids when they're little. And when they're little, they just go for it. They just kind of trust.
Yeah.
And I never drop my kids. You're right. But as they've gotten older, they don't like me doing that. I try to throw them up, and they just grab onto my wrists. So there's, we just have that. I don't know what my connection is, but it's just that kind of like sense of, I mean, I trust you, Dad, but I don't know if I trust you totally.
Well,
and we do that.
I think that's what Jesus, I mean, he doesn't throw any kids in the air, but I think that's what he's getting at when he tells his disciples and the crowd looking on, when he's spending time with those children, the kingdom is of such a these. Like, if you want to enter my kingdom, you got to be like one of these little ones. And why? Not because, like some denominations believe in like an age of innocence, that kids aren't sinful. If you have kids, that ain't true.
Right.
But they're dependent completely. And they do, like you said, when they're little, they'll just go for it. They trust you. There's no doubt in their mind of what you're doing. And that's kind of, that's what God calls us to Himself, to trust.
Right.
Like, that God knows what He's doing.
Right.
And He does.
Right. In every aspect of our stories. Right? God is active, and He's present, and He's doing stuff. I mean, just before we hit record on this podcast, I mean, you and I were just chatting about the practical realities of finances, and times of like where we're kind of we were sharing stories of where we've been financially at a really hard place, not knowing how you're going to make it, how it's going to happen. And then God just, provides these little, we've had it where people just out of the random have sent us like a little financial gift, and it was exactly at the time that we needed it, like the amount. And it's hard, like sometimes I don't know if as you're listening, you're like, yeah, but that doesn't always happen. And I know that doesn't always happen, but I've experienced God's hand of faithfulness. My wife and I have, my family, where it's just, I think our intent in the way that, just on the financial aspect, the way that we try to manage our finances, is that none of this is ours to begin with.
Right.
Yep. Like, even though I work or whatever, and we talk about earning our money, like I don't think I earn or deserve anything. But what God has blessed me with is what God has blessed me with, and so that's always our attitude about our finances or our material possessions, whatever we have, it's from God. So we always, we give back generously and just trust that God's going to provide, and he does.
Yeah.
He really does.
Yeah.
And I think. And I guess whether or not the finances drop from the sky miraculously or not, I share that as a way to demonstrate what it means to understand that our stories, we're not writing them ourselves. Like, we're part of God's story. He is active. He's doing stuff. He's present with us. And I think when we start to align ourselves with that reality, we're filled with hope and peace, even in the midst of the struggle and the uncertainties, because we know that God is faithful. Yeah.
That's right. Well, and we want to, that's to me when our stories get kind of exciting.
Yeah.
To think that the Almighty God is actually interacting with me.
Yeah.
And that He is even writing my story as well, and I kind of get to see like what's going to come next, like what's he going to unveil or drop, and maybe it's going to be something really, really hard, but He's going to be with me in the story as well, and so like even thinking about the financial thing, and giving to God, when we give our offerings, it's not like God's like, all right, guys, I really need your help. Like I'm a little low on funds here.
Yeah.
No, it's really God opening up the opportunity for us to lean into that trust, and that faith, and actually live that story with Him. Like take Him up.
Yeah.
He's saying, I want to provide for you. Let me provide for you.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of freeing, I guess, in a hard sense, when we do give to God. And if you go the full like tithe is kind of like that was like the Old Testament precedent kind of sent.
Literally a tenth. Literally means tenth. Yeah.
I think it's intended to be a hard figure, right? It's not like I can give that easily and I'm still good everywhere else. Like it's supposed to kind of like push you a little beyond our comfort zone.
Yeah.
And I think that's partly what God is after when it comes to our stories. Like if we, I kept saying periphery in my sermon. That's like on the fringe, on the outside. If we keep God at the peripheries, our stories they're not going to be as exciting, I think. And we're going to try and maybe live more comfortably or in our comfort zones. But God is trying to actually get us to live a better story, live in His story, and that's going to take us out of the boat, onto the water, because when we do that, we realize, who is in control.
Right. Well, I not to dwell too much on the financial side of stuff, but there was a season with my wife and I, our first couple of years of marriage, and I was going to school. We didn't hardly have any income. It was super tight, and we didn't manage things well. We spent above our means. We went into massive debt, and we gave nothing. Like we didn't give anything away because I think we were. I don't know. Just looking back, we were really dumb about our money. But but also like we would go back and forth between like just despair and anxiety about it, and then just be like, I don't know, we'll take care of it some other day, and just I don't know how it's gonna happen. But it wasn't. We weren't being faithful about it. We weren't giving because we didn't think we could, and all this kind of stuff. So, like it was a looking back on it, it was not as a peace filled of a time as. I mean, later on when we tried to change things, and we got out of debt and or some debt and started having some income, but then we started giving, and I mean, we learned a lot of this through it's called Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. Yeah. But once we started figuring out how to give first, and then as a trust aspect, like you've been saying, then there was a greater deal of peace in the midst of even though like the finances still weren't there to really make ends meet or get ahead. It just it's a perspective shifting thing of like trusting that God's got it, and like you said, when we give to Him on a financial aspect or time or treasures, whatever it is, when we respond to Him in thanks and praise, then we recognize who we are and what He's given to us. So
totally,
yeah. I mean, lots of good stuff. There's gonna be a lot more coming up in coming weeks, as we already alluded to, about aligning our story with other stories, some verbiage that we'll use when that time comes. But I think for now, Kevin, this has been a good little podcast. It's good to be back on the brown couch.
That's right.
With you. And as always, to you listeners or viewers, please take something that you heard today, think about it, journal about it. Even better, start a conversation with somebody else about it, and see where the Spirit leads you in those conversations.
And know your story too. Like, this is my little plug. I don't know that we take a lot of time journaling. Like you said, that's a great piece of advice. Think back on your life. Yeah. Chart your story. Yeah. God has been writing in it. Yeah. And if that seems hard to believe because of how your life has gone, start praying to Him. Talk to Him about it. Ask God where He was in parts of your story. Let Him answer. Go to His Word. Like, when we engage with God and really understand our story, I think we'll find like He has been actively writing in it the whole way. So it's never too late to get on that page and start seeing where He was working. So know your story, and then when we know our stories, we can share them with others too.
That's true. Awesome. Well, Kevin, thanks, buddy. Have a great rest of your day.
You too, brother.